You may have wondered where some of your favorite stories have come from, and you're probably going to be very shocked to know that some of them are actually true.
We're your hosts, Aaron and Andrew, and today we're going to get down to the top 10 scary stories that are actually true.
Let's get right into it. Coming at number 10, we have The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House is quite possibly the scariest TV show of all time. You heard it here first. The show follows 5 adult siblings whose paranormal experiences at Hill House continue to haunt their daily lives, which make them come together to solve it. I know the description doesn't sound too spooky, but give it a try. Well, apparently the show is inspired by a woman named Sarah Winchester, and her home was named the Winchester Mystery House.
Sarah was next in line to receive the fortunate build on firearms. This eventually led her to being tormented by guilt because she believed that her family and its fortune was haunted by the lives of the people in her firearms took. Then, when her husband passed, she would ask carpenters to build odd things like staircases leading to the ceilings, windows overlooking other rooms, and doors leading to absolutely nowhere. Coming in at number 9, we have the stranger in the backseat. It was a dark and foggy night. Denise was having trouble staying awake and noticed that there'd been a truck following her and flashing their high beams at her. Her anxiety levels were not helped by the fact that she was running low on gas and didn't know where the next town was. Finally, just as she thought she'd have to pull over and sleep till the morning on the side of the road, a tiny gas station appeared. Very run down, but a gas station nonetheless. She pulled in. The attendant made his way around the car and seemed to be very distracted, and she asked him to fill it up, and he even seemed to be making faces at her. He finally agreed to get the gas, but then asked her to pop the hood of the car because it smelled like trouble. Her anxiety from being on the road was starting to flare up again. She was all alone in a creepy gas station out in the middle of nowhere, and the weird attendant was finding reasons to keep her there. He asked her to come look at the engine and that he had to show her something. Not knowing what else to do, almost as if in a daze, she did as he asked. She didn't see a problem and handed him her credit card to pay for the gas. He then returned moments later and said that the credit card company was on the phone. As she went into the station to talk on the phone, he grabbed her arm and said, "I'm sorry, but there's a man crouched down in your back seat of the car and I didn't want him to know that I'd seen him." They called the police, who came to arrest a serial killer who'd stowed away in the car and was waiting for the perfect opportunity to get her.
Coming in at our number 8 spot, we have The Dead Ringers. David Cronenberg is known for his grotesque visuals and characters when he created the movie Dead Ringers. He knew he needed to direct something that wasn't far from reality, so he picked a true horrific story. The movie was directly inspired by the book of Barry Wood and Jack Giesland titled Twins, which is actually based on a true story. The movie follows the twins named Stuart and Cyril Marcus. They lived together in New York during the 1970s and were both gynecologists and experts in the medical field, so you know they were smart and pretty wealthy. Then in 1975, a person walked into their apartment and found that both men had passed away. The cause of death to this day is unknown and often debated, since most believe it to be a substance overdose while others think it was done for the devil. The apartment was completely trashed with food and feces among other things scattered all around the apartment.
At our number 7 spot, we have A Real Nightmare. Now, I know we all know the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street is considered a classic American horror movie, one that gets featured during many people's horror movie marathons. It follows Freddy Krueger, the striped sweater-wearing homicidal ghost who haunts your nightmares. While most of Elm Street's stories is fictionalized, the inspiration for the idea of Freddy Krueger comes from a real-life story with real people. The director, Wes Craven, says his idea for A Nightmare on Elm Street came after reading a story in the LA Times. Craven spoke about an article that he read about a family who had just left Cambodia in the 70s to escape the genocide of Killing Fields. They became refugees who ventured to the US looking for a better life, but found tragedy instead. Now things were fine, and then suddenly the young son was having very disturbing nightmares. He told his parents that he was afraid that if he slept, the thing chasing him would get him. So he tried to stay awake for days at a time. When he finally fell asleep, his parents thought his crisis was over. Then they heard screams in the middle of the night. By the time they got to him, he was dead. He died in the middle of a nightmare. Here was a youngster having a vision of a horror that everyone older was denying. That became the central line of A Nightmare on Elm Street.
At our number 6 spot, we have The Silence of the Lambs. The only horror movie to win the Best Picture Oscar, Silence of the Lambs made Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter a chilling household name, while putting Thomas Harris bestseller and true crime cases that inspired it into the national spotlight. I know Hannibal was a different type of beast, but he was inspired by a real-life serial killer named Harry Hednick. He was probably the furthest from being good, as he was one of Philadelphia's most notorious criminals. He was infamous for his House of Terrors, where he would do unimaginable things to 6 different women that I can't even mention in this video. Even in the movie, Hannibal asked Starling, quote, "What does he do, this man you seek?" In which she replies, "He attacks women." They could easily be talking about Harry Hednick in the scene, especially since he inspired Buffalo Bill as well.
At our hump in the list, we have number 5, Scary Movie. Now, Scream is one of the most beloved horror franchises of all time. It's personally my favorite. But did you know that there's a disturbing true story that inspired it all? To be clear, there wasn't a real murderer stalking around in a ghost face mask, prank calling his victims and asking them about scary movies. But there were real scary stories of horrifying murders that inspired screenwriter Kevin Williamson to pen his game-changing script, originally titled Scary Movie. Now, one day before creating Scream, Kevin Williamson was watching a house for a friend when he started watching true crimes on TV about serial killers. He noticed that one of the windows in the house was open and that he got really freaked out. He picked up the phone and called a friend while he checked the whole house with a knife in his hand. Him and his friend began bantering back and forth about scary movies, which initially struck inspiration for his franchise series. In the movie, there's usually someone home alone when they receive a call from Ghostface, and they begin going back and forth with each other talking about scary movies. Moments before he attacks them, of course. I think the way that Kevin came up with the idea was simply brilliant. And you know, we love it.
Coming in at number 4, we have A Devil in Connecticut. The Devil in Connecticut is a book that is based on the controversial case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren. If you're any bit of a horror fan, names Ed and Lorraine Warren should ring a bell since they're one of the most famous paranormal investigators in history. You know, The Conjuring, Insidious, just to name a few of the films they inspired. The Devil in Connecticut follows the alleged possession of an 11-year-old boy named David Glatzel. The boy terrified everyone in the room, including his own parents, with the paranormal activity in which he was causing. Then Ed and Lorraine Warren would help the boy, and supposedly they managed to get the demon out of the boy, but instead the demon would enter a man named Arn Cheyenne Johnson, who then went on a homicidal spree in which claimed the life of his landlord. This case was named The Devil Made Me Do It, and this inspired many of the films we see today. Arnie was found guilty and sentenced to only 10 to 20 years in prison, but now he's out and much is unknown about his whereabouts.
Here at number 3, we have The Licked Hand. The story goes like this. A very young girl is home alone for the first time with only her dog for company. Listening to the news, she hears killers on the loose in her neighborhood. Terrified, she locks all the doors and windows, but she forgets about the basement window and it's left unlocked. She goes to bed, taking her dog to her room with her and letting it sleep under her bed. She wakes up in the middle of the night to hear a dripping sound coming from the bathroom. The dripping noise frightens her, but she's too scared to get out of bed to find out what it is. To reassure herself, she reaches a hand towards the floor for the dog and is rewarded by a reassuring lick on her hand. The next morning when she wakes up, she goes to the bathroom for a drink of water, only to find her dead, mutilated dog hanging from the shower with his blood slowly dripping onto the tiles. On the shower wall, written in the dog's blood, are the words, "Humans can lick too."
You might have heard this one, but at number 2 we have No Face Charlie. If you grew up in the 1950s and 60s in Western Pennsylvania, chances are you've heard the legend of the Green Man or No Face Charlie. The legend says that No Face Charlie would stalk the remote streets at night and sometimes chase others away from him. No disrespect, but if I saw this in the middle of the night, I would probably be running the other way as well. No Face Charlie was actually based on a real man named Raymond Robinson. In 1919, Robinson was only 8 years old when he was reaching for a bird's nest at the top of an electrical pole when he was suddenly shocked with 11,000 volts of electricity. He was severely injured. His nose, lips, ears, and eyes were gone or completely misshapen, and on top of that, one of his hands were completely blown off. This is what gave him the image that appears haunting for others. But in fact, Raymond was a real kind and friendly individual, but others feared him and would give him this negative stigma regardless of how he really is on the inside. He has now since passed, and I hope he's finally accepted. At a number 1 spot, we have Candyman. This is a cautionary tale for kids not to dig right into their Halloween candy, and he is the sole reason why we have to take extra precaution on that day. The legend differs depending on who you ask. In one legend, it says that if you say his name 5 times, he'll appear right behind you and take your life with his hook. In another legend, he poisons and puts other hazardous items inside of children's candy. But the truth is, this urban legend is revealed in many different stories, so the narrative changes.
They say that many years ago, Candyman was a black slave named Daniel. He was talented at painting and decided to paint a picture for the plantation owner's daughter, in whom he madly fell in love with. When the owner found out, he brought his racist friends to hunt him down. They would eventually get him and cut off his hand and replace it with a hook, which explains the hook for hand. In other iterations, Candyman was named Ronald Clark O'Brien. This man was convicted of killing his 8-year-old son with potassium cyanide laced pixie sticks, all because he wanted insurance money. On his execution day, people chanted, quote, "trick or treat" outside of the room that he died in.
Well, there we have it, our top 10 scary stories that turned out to be true.
Trick or treat, y'all.
I'm your host, Andrew.
And I'm Aaron.
And we hope you guys have a scary day.